Hey, there, it's me, Eden. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and visit my Patreon page for early access. Link in the comment, thanks. Seniors at Fort Russell High. As the school year began, Sarah Beth and I both had the same feelings, or was it lack of feelings? This was supposed to be our last year of high school, right? The climax, the end product of all those years that began when we were rugrats, right? Seniors rule, right? So why were we so unexcited? Why did we feel it was just an interlude to get through before we got on with our lives? Part of it, I guess, was the chatter of our friends about how they'd just die if we didn't win the big football game, or if they didn't get asked to the dance by the right boy, and all that stuff. When you spent the summer with people who really were dying, or struggling to live, or having their whole lives redefined by catastrophic illness, suddenly it doesn't feel worth it to get worked up over whether Muffy gets elected class treasurer or Eric gets a zit just before senior photos. I guess that maybe part of our feelings of blah-dom was caused by the reality that some of Sarah Beth's closest girlfriends were not close friends anymore. Since her cancer, a few, now former, friends ignore her completely. Other friends try, but it's just so awkward. Do they feel guilt for not being able to hang in there with her last spring when everything was so terrible? Or just awkward, not knowing the right thing to say? Or afraid, thinking that hanging around Sarah Beth might bring to them some kind of catastrophe? Oh, a lot of girls, and boys, were nice and friendly, but by and large she felt pretty lonely and isolated. I guess that I don't mind being Annie every now and then, since Annie seems to be her closest girlfriend. There are some other disabled kids at our high school. Or kids with disabilities, I guess I should say. Some of them have a lot of friends, but I guess the difference is that these kids have been disabled for a long time, or all their lives, and they've always been accepted, or rejected, for who they are. But when somebody enters into the world of disability unexpectedly, it scares people. This could happen to me, they think. As my dad pointed out, kids my age don't like to admit that they are vulnerable, that they could die or be crippled. So anyway, I wasn't too surprised on the first day of classes when Joni Stevenson, a girl with spina bifida who uses a wheelchair, smiled at Sarah Beth and said, "Welcome to the club." Her hand waved between her wheelchair and Sarah's four-pronged cane. Sarah Beth said, "Thanks, Joni." I can't say I was crazy about the initiation process, though. It looks like maybe Joni will become the kind of friend that Sarah Beth needs, one who will accept her and understand what it's like to be physically different in a school society where wearing the wrong brand of shoe can force you into social exile. The one thing we did take seriously was our schoolwork. We already had good grades, but we wanted to keep them that way. The only way we could afford the university was on scholarship. The only way we could afford to get married in less than 5 years was to get really good scholarships. So we really focused on our schoolwork, even the dull courses from the boring teachers. In the late afternoons and evenings we would study together. Most of the time when we would study at her house, I would be Mark. But once in a while when we would take a break, she would hang some earrings on my ears just to see how they'd look and to keep the holes open, or she'd try a new nail polish on my fingers as well as hers. It was kind of a semi-annual appearance. Of course, sometimes we would play kiss and grope, too, but with Mrs. Holding just around the corner from us, we couldn't get too loud about it. I was still working out with Sarah in the dungeon. A few days after Rick's visit, we were in her room changing from school clothes. I was slipping into some Annie clothes, solid yellow shorts and a yellow and white striped top, when she said, "Mark, I'm sorry. You don't have to become Annie every time you help me with physical therapy." I think that I was just angry enough at all the PT torture that I took my anger out on you. I paused. I wanted to be careful how I said things. You don't think you need Annie anymore? Her pretty freckled face screwed up like it does when she's concentrating. There will be times when I think I will really need Annie around. There will be times when Annie and I will have fun together, like we did when we went to visit Roberta. But I don't want you to feel like you have to be Annie. I love you as Mark, and that should be good enough. I still wasn't sure how I wanted to respond. I slipped my cross trainers back on. Then I went to the makeup table. Spreading foundation over my light growth of beard, I said, Annie's with you now because Annie wants to be. Annie will be with you whenever you need her, whenever you want her. I traced a little color on my lips and pressed them. I'm glad that you said that I don't have to change every time we do therapy together, because there are some days it will save me time just to stay Mark, or I might be too tired to bother, or whatever. I set my wig in place. But right now, I'm glad to be Annie. And now, it's off to the dungeon with you. We had assumed, Kevin, her physical therapist and I, that Sarah Beth would be more comfortable using a wheelchair to get around campus at our high school. Sarah Beth had no intention of doing so. She was going to walk. We worked with the school nurse and the assistant principal to set up a schedule that would keep the trips between classes as short as possible. Whenever possible, we would have classes together or nearby, so I could run interference for her in the hallways from one to another. Of course, that had a side benefit, I got to be with her more. When I couldn't travel with her, we had made arrangements with other friends to do the job. We always knew that there was a wheelchair in the nurse's office in case Sarah felt weak someday or had to travel a really long distance in a short time. It worked, at least for the first couple of weeks. She wore a backpack to free her hands, and she swung along with her prosthetic leg and cane, determined not to let a little thing like an upper leg amputation slow her down. I don't know if I said this before or not, but it fits here, so I'll say it anyway. Many people with disabilities can do just about anything they want to, but it takes a lot more planning and a lot more energy. They don't want to be excused from life. And Sarah was determined to live as normally as any other teen. On Wednesday of the third week of September, though, it stopped working, at least for a while. At 10:15, we were nearing a corner in the hallway when Randy Amos, a scrub end on the football team, came charging past the corner, looking behind him to receive a pass from a friend, and smeared right into us both. We all three went down. Sarah Beth had fallen a lot in therapy, and a fair number of times since. She never wants help, although sometimes she'll accept my arm to help her balance and pull up. She doesn't want anybody to panic or make a fuss. She just wants folks to stand back or to go about their business while she goes about hers. This time, though, I heard her cry out in pain as she went down. As she started to roll over to get up, she cried out again and flopped back. I scrambled to my knees. Sarah, what's wrong? I asked. My back, my hip, I pulled something really bad. I can't turn over. I can't get up. This is so stupid. I called for somebody to call 911, that we'd need some professionals to be able to move her. Amos just stood there, shaking, saying, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I looked back up at him, angry, but wanting to focus on Sarah. That was really dumb, man, but right now I don't want to deal with you being sorry. Just go on, okay? Out of my peripheral vision, I noticed a teacher leading him off, as he looked back at us with pleading eyes. The nurse came with a cell phone, and completed giving instructions to the ambulance crew. We helped Sarah get as comfortable as possible. By 11, she was at the hospital on her back on a gurney, with her leg unattached, unable to move without wincing. They took her to X-ray and moved her around for pictures, which didn't help her pain level any. Her mom rushed from work and tracked us down as she was being moved into a bed. I tried to sum up what we had found out so far. They say it's nothing that won't heal with time, but that it will take some time. There are muscle tears and strains in her lower back and hip, some compression damage in her vertebrae and in some other joints from being jammed so hard, and her ankle is badly sprained. They removed the prosthesis in the ambulance, so it wouldn't be pulling on her sore hip and back. I wasn't there when she actually lost her leg last spring, but I don't think I've ever seen her hurting this bad. Sarah moaned and squeezed her mother's hand. Actually, I've hurt worse, but just not in so many places as right now, she corrected me. Sarah stayed overnight at the hospital until Thursday afternoon, with some pretty heavy painkillers. I stayed in her room. Sometimes she'd wake and mumble, "Hi, Mark." Sometimes she'd mumble, "Hi, Annie, would you get me some crushed ice?" I didn't have the wardrobe, but I was fitting the role. I went to school Friday and the next Monday and Tuesday, while Sarah stayed home. She didn't wear her prosthetic at the hospital or at home. I spent the weekend at her house, sleeping in Julie's room and wearing Annie clothes. On Saturday, it was my Tigger bibs. I started to put a yellow sundress over my head on Sunday morning, and she just shook her head and said, "Annie, what am I going to do with you? It's nearly the end of September, and you're still dressing like it's summer. We're going to have to improve your wardrobe." By the time she was ready to return to school, she insisted on wearing her prosthetic leg, even though she would be using a wheelchair. She didn't want people to stare. It took nearly 2 weeks before she was strong enough to try walking again, and then she ended up in the wheelchair before day's end and at home. Through it all, I worked with her as I could, massaging the sore muscles and helping her exercise as much as she could endure. Well, Annie and I did. Please subscribe for the next part. And visit my Patreon page for early access.